So hi everyone, this is Michael Chen. I'm an Associate Product Manager here at Tableau, and I'd like to welcome you all to Raiders of the Lost Postgres, using Tableau and Tableau to gain new business insights. Now, I'd like to take a moment first to thank Patrick, Diego, and the entire team for setting this up, and everyone for attending. I know it's very early out here on the West Coast, so I'm very grateful for everyone who dialed in today. And for everyone who couldn't make it, we'll make this video available on Vimeo online shortly thereafter. So, first things first, there we go. Happy Chinese New Year. I'll take a moment to say that 我想为大家恭喜发财，天天高兴. What basically I just said was I wish everyone a prosperous and healthy new year. So, I'm not the biggest fan of slideshows. However, I would like to give everyone an overview of what we'll be covering today and make sure that everyone is about on the same page. I'll also make sure that this deck and any links that I reference are available after the presentation. So we'll start today with a quick overview of the Postgres repository to try to get everyone on the same page. Next, I'll guide you through the creation of one of our new admin views, which for those of you who do not know are created using the Postgres repository. And finally, I'll show you some of the more powerful information stored in the repository and how you can leverage that to answer higher level questions that you may have about your BI solution. Now, when I was running through this in trials, I was able to save about 15 minutes at the end to take questions, which reminds me I should put my timer on right now. So during this session, I'll do my best to give you guys at least that much time for questions today, because I feel that that is the most important part of this process. There we go, timer is on. So before I begin, I'd like to mention an important link that you'll all want to bookmark. This would be my blog post on this very topic for the Tableau blog titled New Views for Server Administrators BI on BI. If you search for this title or my name on tableau.com/about/blog, you should be able to find it pretty quickly. And since I like to artificially inflate my own view counts, I'll give you a moment to do that right now. I'll wait. All right, so in this post, you'll find all the information about how to connect to the repository, where in the community forums you'll find great examples of customer work in this area, and most importantly, the files that we'll be using and recreating today. All right, so let's get started. First off, what is the Postgres repository? Well, in a nutshell, the Postgres repository is used by Tableau to store server metadata. Now, this metadata can include users, groups, and permissions. It could include workbooks and connections. It can even include background jobs. The repository also stores files used to display file-based views, such as CSV, Excel, and Access files. Now, the repository does not store extract, that would be our data engine, and it runs on PostgreSQL version 9.3.5/1. Therefore, it should have all the functionalities of that particular version of Postgres. And since server version 8.2.5, we've given full read-only access and privileges to every single table in the repository to all users. Now, that's the repository in a nutshell. But the best way to find out what data is really available to you is really just to connect and explore the tables. And that's what we'll do next with a guided build. But before we begin, though, I would like you to keep three concepts in mind as I'm showing you how to use these tables. These three concepts are simplicity, speed, and scalability. And I'll be telling you more as we go along about why each of these concepts should really always be in the forefront of your mind when using the Postgres repository. Now, first let me show you what we'll be creating today. This is one of the new admin views that we released in version 9.0. If you've been a part of our beta program, then you've already had a chance to see and test out some of these views. Now, the dashboard I'm showing in particular tracks the view count of specific views on your server. It also tracks when these views are viewed and who's doing the viewing. It's a quick and easy way to answer the question, what's the top viewed content on my server? Who are my top power users? So today, we're going to connect to our Postgres repository and show you how to create a slightly simplified version of this view. So to show you a little bit about the functionality, I can go choose a particular day, or a particular hour, let's say 8 a.m. right around the start of this, and I can see what my top most viewed views are for that day, that hour, and who the top viewer is. And of course, I can also do the whole process in reverse, where I can see what views is this particular viewer viewing. Now, let me get out of here. So a quick note, as we start building today, you'll notice that I'll be going very slow, very meticulously, and explaining not only what I'm doing, but the entire thought process of why I'm doing it along the way. The reason for this is the magic, or the challenge, if you will, of working with all this repository data isn't in building the viz, but rather it's really in the planning, the understanding, and the exploration of the tables themselves. There are no special calculation syntaxes or particular processes to memorize. The actual building of the viz is as easy as using Tableau. So for some background, the server I'll be connecting to today already has read-only access available. And I also have several backups just in case, because whenever I give a WebEx, I tend to have a litany of connection issues. So right now, I'm going to connect to this server with the read-only user. All instructions on how to set up the read-only user are detailed in the blog. And as soon as you'll connect, you'll see all these tables on the left now available to you. And if you'd like to follow along, please go ahead. So if you're like me, the first response you'll get when seeing all these tables is, let's dive in and figure everything out. Actually, that's a complete lie. My first response when seeing all these tables is, what is this monstrosity? What do any of these tables actually mean? How in the heck am I supposed to use these tables? Luckily for everyone here today, I've had quite a few months of experience with this repository, and now have a pretty good idea of what's in it, so hopefully I'll serve as a better guide. I'd like to point out two tables specifically, those being the HTTP request table, or the underscore HTTP request table, and the other table I'd like to point out is the next gen permissions table. So the reasons I want to point out these tables is because they're quite beastly as tables. The HTTP request table contains just about every single HTTP action a user can take on a view. That includes changing a filter, that includes changing a parameter, that even includes clicking on blank space. So as you can imagine, this table can really get quite hefty. In addition, the next-gen permissions table I showed you earlier contains every single permission given to every single view, every single data source, every single workbook, every single project ever on your entire server, which, as you can imagine, can also get pretty hefty. And if you're wondering how large these tables can get, well, on this server that I'm connecting to, together they take hundreds of millions, if not billions of rows. And if you're wondering how long it takes to maybe extract all that data, it's longer than the 15 hours that I tried and failed to a few months ago. So all this conversation brings me back to those three concepts I mentioned earlier. And namely, the concepts I want to point out are simplicity and speed. Now, we all want to make the best dashboard, the prettiest dashboard, the most awesome dashboard we can, because we all want to show off what we can do. But when we're dealing with so much data, it's really more important instead to make the simplest dashboard, to choose only the right joins and to answer just the question you're targeting. After all, as I always say, the best, most beautiful viz in the world is useless if it takes forever to load. Now, of course, you may be saying, Michael, I only have a small install of only about 10 users, maybe only 2 users ever use it at once. I won't generate that much data. To that I say, you may only have 10 users now, but one day you may have 10,000 users. So thinking about scalability now is a great investment into your future. So now to get off my soapbox and get into the build. So to help you make simple, speedy, and scalable dashboards and views, we created something called the audit tables. And I believe we released them in version 6 or 7. And what the audit tables are every single table that starts with the letters H-I-S-T, hist, if you will, underscore. In addition, it's every single table that starts with the word historical. Now, to give you a little bit of information on the audit tables, they store a lot of actions for the past 180 days. After 181 days. And after those 181 days, that information is purged. So that is the longest history of any tables we have in the repository. In addition, it has some pretty good indexing as well for all these tables. And they are basically made to work within together and made to help you along the auditing and monitoring process, thus being called the audit tables. So the main table here that you want to focus on is the historical events table. And I'll drag that now to our joins. And let's take a look at this table. So there's a few things that you'll see. First, you'll see here this column, historical event type ID. And you'll see here it's just a bunch of numbers. And what these numbers mean in particular, each number is associated with a particular event type that we track in the audit tables. Now, the key to figure out which event types they are exists in, as you might be able to guess, the historical event types table. If we open up this table, we see the type ID, and then we see the name of the action. And in server version 9, I believe we track some 95 to 100 different actions. And I won't go over all of them today. But suffice to say that in order to make these two tables work together, as in to see what type of actions are actually occurring on our server, these tables need to be joined. So let's drag this table now to our joins, and we'll see what type of join Tableau automatically made for us. As you can see, they work very well together. So historical event type ID from the historical events table was joined onto type ID from the historical events types table. Now, if we update that, so now we can see the type ID and the action taken. Now, another thing I want to point out is this created at table. What this created at table is showing is the time at which this action took place. And now there's a quick caveat. By default, the server operates in UTC time, or Greenwich Mean Time as it used to be called. And there are many ways to work around this and to change your workbooks and to adapt for your own time zone. But for the sake of simplicity today, we're going to just leave it as it is and pretend we're all living in Greenwich for a little bit. All right, so now we've got through the two main tables of this. We want to go back to the question. And as a quick refresher, what we're trying to create is a dashboard that tells me what's my top viewed content and who are my top viewers, my top power users, if you will. So thinking out loud a little bit, if I want to figure out what my top viewed views are, I probably want those views to be a part of this table, of these joins. I see here I have a table called hist views. If I look in this table, I see the name of each view, the repository URL, the revision, the view ID, and this other column right here called ID. I want you to keep this column in mind, and I'll bring it back in a second. Now, also, I probably want some information on workbooks too, and I definitely want to know who's been doing all the viewing because I want that top users as well. So let's see right here we have a table called hist_workbooks. If we open this up, we see once again the name of the workbook, the repository URL, the revision, the ID, once again, the size, and the workbook ID. Now, what does this column ID mean? So this column, this ID column is not the ID of the workbook that you'll find in any other table or reference anywhere else except the audit tables. This particular column ID in all of the hist underscore tables is a particular ID specifically made for the audit tables to work together. So when you're making a join on the audit tables between each other, you want to try to find the connection of the hist workbook / ID or the hist task ID or the hist view ID. And I'll show that now as I join the hist views table onto my large joins right here. As you can see, we look down the historical events and we see hist view ID right here. And we want to join that to the ID, not the view ID, mind you, but the ID table of the hist views table. And because I want to track actions not just to views, but all other actions as well, let's make this a left join. And let's do the same with workbooks as well. Once again, coming down and finding the hist workbook ID, and just a simple ID here. Make that a left join. Okay, now I have information about actions done to views and actions done to workbooks, but we go back to the initial question again. I also want who are my top users, who are my most active users. So I can see here that there's a historical hist users or historical users table. But where exactly does that come in? How do I make that join? If I were to look here in the historical events table, I don't necessarily, or I will not necessarily see a quick, straightforward way to decide which where this table should join to. I see instances of where I see the word user, like historical actor user ID, historical target user ID, historical actor site ID. I see other instances where the word user is involved, but where do I make this join? So this goes back to the nature of this very table itself. As I said before, the historical events table tracks actions taking on the server. So those actions are usually caused by a user or done to a user. Thus, the idea of the actor and the target. So an action done to a user may be if me as a server admin goes in and upgrades a user's privileges or demotes a user's privileges or adds a user, creates a user. Also, an action taken by a user may be a user publishes a workbook, a user gets a subscription email for a workbook or a view, a user deletes some content, or maybe even that the user views a view, which is exactly what we're trying to track today. So from that information, it becomes clear that what I want to join the historical users table on is the historical actor user ID column. So once again, making that connection. And historical actor user ID, once again, ID, not user ID for the audit tables. And with that, those are the joins that we need to make in order to answer our question. So now we can go into Tableau and start building this dashboard out. So,
hey, Michael, we had a quick question. Thor asked, can you do a quick review of the joins when all the joins are complete?
When all the so should I? Does he want just a quick review of all these joins, or?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds fair and reasonable. I'll do that right now. So the joins I'm doing here is, if you see here, from historical events to historical users, I'm doing a left join on historical actor ID to the historical user ID found in the historical users table. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to associate all of the actors in the historical events table with a particular user. Now, the reason why this is a left join is because, as I said before, there are some actions that aren't associated with the user, or some actions that aren't necessarily done by a user. They may be done to a user. So I want to include all those actions around without taking those out of my equation, which an inner join or right join would make. Likewise, the historical views table, or the hist_views table, is joined much in the same way, with the historical view ID and the ID of the associated table. Once again, it's a left join because, as I said, there are some actions done on data sources, workbooks, not just all on views. And what I'm trying to establish with this join is I want that every single action taken to a view, which is recorded in historical events, be associated with a particular view's name. When we store it in the historical events table, it's just there as a historical view ID. By joining this table, additionally, now I have the name of the view. I have some more information of the view as well. The same can be said for the historical workbooks table. Much the same idea as historical views as well, and very much the same join. And in fact, in most of the joins you create on the historical events table, with some caveats and some outliers, are mostly these left joins onto from the ID in the historical events table, such as actor, user, comment ID, config. It's all very associative here. For example, if you see a historical group ID, you can assume there's probably, as you can see here, a historical groups table. And within that table, you can safe to assume that there is a column called ID. Now, finally, the one thing that is not a left join on this is for the initial join I created from the historical events to the historical event types table. The reason why this is an inner join because it honestly shouldn't make too much sense to be anything else, because the historical events types table contains all of the actions that we track. And in theory, that should be the only actions that exist in historical events. If there's some type of odd error that pops up there, that's not a particular action that we're tracking regardless. And the join I made on here was for historical event type ID to the type ID of historical event types. What that does is it associates, once again, that type ID, that number, with an actual English event that you can understand and see oh, this is what's going on. So I can see it's this user is accessing a view in this time, not this user is performing event type 1312 or whatnot. Does that answer your question?
Believe so. I haven't heard anything else. Yeah, that answers it. We also have one other one. If we're doing an incremental extract for this, can we confirm that we would use the created at field?
If we're doing an incremental extract of this, use the create field for what purpose?
See if we got some clarification here. I'll let you know once we have more. If you want to continue, we can come back to that later.
All right, and once again, well, I'll try to save us a lot of time at the end for Q&A. So if there's any pressing questions, write them down because we'll try to make some time at the end. So back to the flow. I remember the first question I wanted to ask was, what's my top viewed content? So first, I want to define that I'm only looking at actions that constitute viewing a view. Luckily, in the historical event types dimension here, we have something called name. And if we were to quickly add that, we see, well, here's all the actions that I track. Here's access data source, access view, add comment, append to data source, so on and so forth. These are all the actions that we track. So it stands that if I were to make a filter of this, and only select access view, now I've filtered out every single action that's not accessing a view or viewing a view. And it's as simple as that to focus in on one particular action. Now, the second thing I want to know is once again, I want to know what my top viewed view is, so it stands to reason that I also need the name of the view up here. And to figure out, since I've already narrowed it down to accessing a view, I can go to number of records, which goes to the most granular level. In this case, it would be an action taken. Come here, drag that up, do a sort here by number of records. Let's make that descending. And add that here, and boom. In a few pill drags, a few clicks, I now know what the #1 most viewed view is on my entire server. Happens to be this one.overview view. Now, there's something else to know about the audit tables, and that is there's a built-in hierarchy to them. So as we saw before, we had dragged on information about workbooks into these joins. If I want to, I could drag on projects as data sources, a lot of other tables as well. But if you notice, there wasn't a direct connection between the views table and the workbooks tables. While they were connected to a main table, they weren't connected to each other. So one would think that maybe they don't know how to interact with each other. However, with the audit tables, we have a built-in hierarchy. So we know what views belong to what workbooks. So if I want to figure out what workbooks all of these belong to, all I'd have to do is drag the name of the workbook onto my details shelf. And all of a sudden I see, okay, maybe my first analysis was a bit wrong here. I'm seeing a lot of different workbooks here, all with a view called Sheet 1. So clearly I didn't get specific enough with my last question. I need to find a better way to differentiate my my views. Luckily, we have view ID. And this is the unique ID given to every single view on your server, and it's never the same ID for two different views. Now if we drag view ID up here, and then sort this, now we have the actual top most viewed view, which is harder than it sounds to say, on my entire server. And for a quick note, you'll see null pop up occasionally on these tables. What null actually means in this context is that these views did exist for some view. However, that view was either deleted or elsewise removed from the server, so it's no longer available here. That's how many views went to a view that no longer exists. So now let's say I don't want to know all the information for the entire history of my server. I only want to know what's the top most viewed view in the past, I'll say 7 days. That's where this created at date can come in handy. If I were to add this to my filter now and go say I want a relative date and say I only want information to do with the last 7 days, I can easily add that filter, and this will just give me for the past 7 days what is my top most viewed view. Let's name this as so. Now the second question I asked was, who are my top viewers? And I can easily make that view from the information I have as well. Let me just even duplicate this one. Take some of these off because I still want the action of accessing a view. I still very much want the idea of the last 7 weeks. But let's say now I only want to know who are the top viewers. Well, that's as simple as one drag, and sort this. And there, we see that this workgroup user by far, which is one of our generic usernames that anyone can sign into, is the most active viewer of views on my entire server. Okay, so now I have the top viewers, and the top views as well. But maybe I want some more information about view trends. Maybe I want to see this over time. Actually, instead of making a new one, let me duplicate this one because I like saving myself some time. And if I want to know how many views are going on over time, I can keep almost the exact same layout I had before, except maybe bring my number of records down to the rows section, and instead make my column access this created at date. And now, if I want to focus on a specific day, bring that down to day, and I can see per day how many views I got on my server. And it's just as simple as that. So let's call this one trends. Now we have the basic information that we want. Let's bring it all together in a dashboard. So we have this timely trend, and oops, let me adjust that so it's easy for everyone to see. There we go. We have this timely trends. We have maybe my top views, my top viewers rather, and my top views. And there we have in a nutshell what are the view trends over my server over time, and what are my top most viewed views, and who are my top viewers. Now, of course, as I showed earlier with the new admin view, we have some actions here associated as well. One of the actions were that you can select any date on this trend and just see the view interactions for that particular day. So I'm going to add that action right now. And we'll call this select date. Make it on selection. And we'll just select it on the created at day field. Select OK. And now if I were to click on a particular day, as you can see, all the other tables change. And I have information on just that particular day. So I know on February 15th, the most viewed view was dashboard test run investigation. Let me get out of there. All right, so I just demonstrated a pretty quick and simple way to use the admin to use the audit tables I just demonstrated a quick and easy way to use the repository. There we are. To give you some higher level admin information. In this case, view count. Now there's a lot more information in the repository as well. It goes far beyond just actions taken by a user. And today I want to demonstrate one of those higher level type of workbooks, if you will. So this workbook I'm going to show off today is also on that blog post that I keep referring to and I keep wanting you guys to go to and click on. It's called the Subscriptions Timer workbook. And to give you a bit of background on what this workbook does is that it tells you whether or not a subscription email for a view or a workbook is going out on time. Now, to give you a bit of a background about how subscriptions work on our server, a subscription, just like any other background task, gets created on the server and then gets put into a queue. As with everything else in the queue, it has a priority number. Now, this priority is for subscriptions is usually between 1 and 100, and the default for a subscription is 50. Zero priority is the least important, and of course 100 being the most important of all the tasks. So if you can imagine, when a subscription goes into the queue, it has to wait for every other task with its priority or higher that came in before it to run first before it can send out this email. So how this might actually affect your server is if you were to figure out all your subscriptions are consistently late. for long periods of time, that means maybe you're overtasking your queue. Maybe there's just too much running in the background, and there's some capacity planning that needs to be involved here. And also, this queue system is also why you often see a varied delivery time for your subscriptions. Let's say the same subscription might be sent on this day. If it's scheduled at 4 o'clock, it might be scheduled at 4:15. It might go at 4:15. The next day it might go at 4:04. The next day it might go at 4:30. It's all because it's waiting there in the queue. So to show off what these dashboards do, as you can see here, you can search for a particular name and search, and here you'll see how many of the user's subscriptions arrived on time on that particular day. And if you hover over these, you can see exactly what that subscription is. Likewise, here there is a user parameter that allows you to determine how much leeway you want to give the server. Let's say right here it's defaulted to if a subscription is late by 30 minutes or more, then it's late. If it's under 30 minutes, then it's okay. But if I want to be a little more harsh with this, let's say I'm only giving it a 5-minute leeway, then all of a sudden I see that there's a lot more late subscriptions being sent out. For example, this one right here, it's on a 4 a.m. subscription, and it was delivered at 4:10, which means it's 5 minutes late. The next thing you'll see here is a parameter that controls time zone. As I said earlier, all the default time values in the server are saved as UTC time. What I did here was just create a single calculated field that allows you to control what time zone you're in, or the UTC offset you're in, and change all the values over to your time zone. And this is just one of many ways to address the time zone discrepancies. So other dashboards on here show you, let's say, how many of your total view subscriptions are on time or late, and what they are. It also shows you, let's say, same thing for workbooks, and the final one on here will show you what particular subscriptions are always late and how late they usually are. So in the time I have left, I'm not going to give a complete detailed walkthrough on how I created this dashboard, but I do want to point out some certain specifics that I feel are very interesting and show off some of the information that's stored in the Postgres repository, some of the really cool things you can do with it. And where that magic is in my data source. Now let me connect. So if I can expand this table right here so everyone can see, it appears that here are some things that we all recognize, the audit tables. And here's some additional tables joined on to the audit tables. Now, going back to what I said earlier about simplicity, speed, and scalability, this is probably not what you want to do normally. The audit tables are made to work in isolation and made to work together. That's how they're fast, that's how they're quick. By adding additional tables that aren't in the audit tables onto them, as you can imagine, you're expanding the already massive size of the audit tables and you're slowing yourself down. In this case, the only reason that these joins were made was because there were specific things not already built into the audit tables that I had to pull from other tables. And along those lines, we're always working to expand the audit tables ourselves. And especially now that we've given everyone read-only access, it's an even bigger deal for us to make our audit tables more powerful and more complete than ever. So I'll give you a little bit of background of what I'm bringing into these tables. As you can see here, historical users is being used, and I've also dragged on regular users table. I can tell you now the only reason I put on this table was for one single column, and that was friendly name. So there's username and then friendly name. I can always tell you that I've already put in the request int for 9.01 or somewhere around that time to get friendly names dragged into the historical users tables as well. The other table I used was descriptions. And I'll show you that table now. And what that is just the definition of what your particular subscriptions are. So what I really like to point out is this particular pill right here, this particular join I made called schedule binary. Now, this may look like an audit table. This does not exist by default when you download the server. This is not one of our existing repository tables. I had to go and create this particular table, and I'll show you what I created and why I created it. So if we look at the original historical schedules table, which is what I was looking at for figuring out whether or not to tell subscriptions are on time. The original reason I came to this table was because I realized, as I said before with the historical events table, we track every event. Those events include the sending of a workbook subscription email or a view subscription email. That means I know exactly when those emails were sent out. Therefore, if I know what original schedules those emails were on, then I can compare those two timestamps and figure out whether or not that email is going out late consistently. But when I was originally looking through this, I was very perplexed because I was trying to figure out that connection. And of course, I could see name every 6 hours, every 15 minutes, just after midnight every hour, and that can make some sense to me, and I can compare it to that. But if you can name a subscription anything you want. I could have named a subscription every blue moon, or when the Seahawks win the next championship. But it won't necessarily mean anything to the server. So what I then found was this day of the month mask and day of the week mask, end at minute interval, priority, schedule type, and all of these values. And I just see, what are these random integers going on here? I'm seeing 0, 62, 64, 16s here for the day of the week mask. The day of the month, I'm seeing a lot of zeros. On another server, I saw a 1 here or a 131 here. And I was wondering to myself, this doesn't make any sense. Clearly, to me, if I just want to have a subscription go off at a particular day of the week, then I'll just make a binary mask, 7 digits, 0 for no subscription being sent that day, 1 for a subscription being sent that day. And then as I was looking over these, I realized, oh, that's exactly what this table actually is doing. All of these are just the integer casting of a binary mask. For the day of the week mask, it's a 7-digit binary, and for day of the month, it's a 31-digit binary. And what all 0 means is go down to the next level. So if you start at month and it's a 0, go down to week. If it's a 0 there, go down to hour, and that's the schedule priority of that. So quickly, I realized I need to convert these back if I want to compare it back into binary. Now, of course, the conversion from integer to binary is not a function you're going to find in any of our table calcs or any of our calculated fields. However, I know that the casting function is a function in Postgres. As we said before, the Postgres repository runs on version 9.3.5/1 of Postgres. That means every function there is available to me. So what I went and did here was I casted those 2 columns that I needed back in binary as a binary again. So day of the month, I cast it as a 31-bit binary, as you can see here, and day of the week, I casted this as a 7-digit binary. And by bringing that in, and I'll show you some more of the work, bringing that in, I was able to basically make a series of string calculations and finally figure out how to, I'll show you one of the more gnarly ones here. And I'll show, and finally figure out how to compare that original timestamp with the scheduled timestamp. And as you can see, it gets a bit gnarly here. And there's many of them. But finally, by having a lot of true-false statements and comparing a lot of them, I was able to come up with one simple statement that'll tell me unequivocally whether or not my schedule was being sent on time. And that is just an example of a deeper level analysis that you can do with the Postgres repository. With a little bit of thinking, a little bit of more high-level calculations, you can get a lot of information from these tables. So Today, I showed some examples of the information you can obtain from the Postgres repository. As you've seen, it goes far beyond monitoring and reporting. With practice, experimenting, and maybe even a little help from the active community, you'll find that you can quickly start asking and answering questions of your data that you never thought to ask before. As I said earlier, all links and slides will be made available after this talk. In addition, we record this entire presentation, so you may go back and watch it over again at any time. I would like to now open up the floor for questions.
We have a couple here. 1 second. So Jen asked, is changing the UTC time going to be covered? I'd like the recommended method. I've seen different ways to do this.
Let's see. I'm not certain there is a recommended method, if you will, and the reason for that is that it depends sometimes. Sometimes when you're working with a particular data source, one method may work when you're doing a live connection, but it may fail when you extract that data source. This happens in Postgres sometimes when you use one particular data method. Now, the method that I used for these workbooks that I used originally was, I'll show you this, event created at TZ, was that I just did a date add with the hour with a user parameter time zone and then the created at. So what all this calculated field does is it takes the user created time zone value that you can define as just a parameter. In this case, for Pacific time, rather, it's -8. And that just gets added to the created at value. Now, for the admin tables, we do a slightly different, in which we create an offset value and then add that to the created at value, and we have our script change that offset value for every single use case, for every single server that's installed on. So there is not a particular suggested method for how to work with that currently, but suffice to say that that's definitely something we'd like to work on, and the entire time zone offset is something we'd like to address in the future.
Great. We have, so going back to that question I asked before about the incremental extract. So the original question was, if we're doing an incremental extract for this, can we confirm we would use the created_at field? They clarified that they would use the incremental extract to provide access to their users and create user filters, do those sorts of things.
Sorry, I did that entire talk without taking a sip of water, so I was trying to get one in there. So in fact, the answer to that question is yes. The created_ value, let me try to pull that up here, is exactly what you want to key in on. It's this value is populated every single time a particular action is taken with the timestamp of that action. So this is actually the most important single dimension here, and that is the one you will key in on.
Great. Santosh asks if the join conditions will ensure that there are no duplicate records.
Does that mean no duplicate records within, let's say, getting the same view twice?
Let's see if there's any clarification. Yes.
Well, by using the audit tables in general, there shouldn't be a situation of duplicate records because as we mentioned earlier, as we mentioned earlier with that specific ID, there we go. With that specific ID value found in every single audit table, it's unique. So this ID only exists to this particular view. So when you create these joins, there won't be a duplicate value regardless. Now, if you start joining these to other tables that aren't the audit tables, such as I have done here, then you open yourself up for the possibility of duplicate information. But in this particular case, with just within the audit tables, there won't be duplicate information if just by joining them onto each other.
Okay. I believe that answers it. Let's see, we have a couple more. Alok asks, how about storing data beyond 181 days, not in the same workgroup database, but on another instance of Postgres?
So we don't have a recommended process for this, but I do know that a lot of our customers do in fact do it. And we like I said, we don't have necessarily a recommended method or a supported method for this process, but options I've heard from speaking with customers is that some of our customers just take the entire Postgres repository, dump that into a Solr repository to work with, so it's increased speed. Others take whatever is being reaped off and puts it into a different repository there. So there are definitely methods to do that and to keep history beyond 181 days. But once again, there's no official solution to that right now.
Great. John asks if we are able to filter views to a specific site.
Absolutely. And let me go, I should still have this file open. And if you go to any of the workbooks that I showed off today, that can all be found in that wonderful blog I keep referencing, you'll find that another join I could have easily added here for site level, let me bring it down, was this table, the historical sites table. And what adding this to the join does is it allows me to control which site I want to look at. So here, the historical actor site ID would be the one you want to join on, once again, on that ID. And what this will allow me to do is it tracks which site the actor is coming from. So if on one particular site, this user is viewing this view, on the other particular site, another user is viewing a different view, then I can figure out exactly which site those viewers are coming from. On the completed workbooks, you'll find that this join is already made. For the purposes of this demonstration, I decided just to focus on server level, but that information is definitely there.
Awesome. A couple more. Angela asks how she could easily see peak concurrency.
That is an interesting question, one that I am actually currently working on to define. So I guess that depends on your definition of what peak concurrency means. If your definition of peak concurrency is within a certain amount of time, how many users are looking or viewing a view or doing a particular action, well, that's as simple as if I were to go take this trends value and change it from day to, say, hour or any other controlled binning, I could put this down to maybe every 5-minute interval, how many actions are being taken at a certain time. There's a way to do it that way. There is also one of the other workbooks I released called Server Sizing. TWB, I believe, gives one of my early attempts at defining peak concurrency, which I used the HTTP request table, that beastly table I was referring to earlier, to figure out when the most actions were being taken. I guess it all depends on your definition of concurrency, and as I said earlier, I'm actively working right now to come up with a strong definition of that and to release some tools into the future that can be used along those lines and for capacity planning. To give you a quick preview of what may be coming in the next year.
Awesome. I think we have time for a few more. Marwan asks, the activated at and deleted at columns in the system users table are not documented in the database dictionary. Are they deprecated, or how can they be used? Delete at only contains null values in our database.
All right. So if we go to the table in question here and we try to find wrong table. There we go. Let's go to this table here. And we see the same situation here with activated at and deleted at. I would say for this particular case, I've seen very few reasons to use the system users over, let's say, the historical users table. We document well the audit tables, and we try our best not to make abrupt changes to those. However, with the other tables, we can't make the same promise. There's a lot of schema changes always going on, so it could very well be that these two columns were deprecated in our earlier version. And for the particular information that we see here as deleted at and activated at, there's actually ways to get through that from the audit tables as well. The action of creating a user and deleting a user both exist within the audit tables, and there you can see when a user is created at or deleted at as well.
Awesome. I think we have about 3 more if you're cool getting through those.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so the historical views consist of historical information. If so, I would assume the view name should exist even after deleting the actual view. Is there any time lag for hist tables to get updated with information about these events?
So there is a small time lag in the historical views table. It's not significant enough as to say that if you were to delete a view now, it would still exist several times. So we call them the historical tables, but really called the audit tables, which is the idea of how. Yeah, let me try to rephrase that. Which is the idea of what actions have been taken before. So, in terms of those null values we were seeing before, the view no longer available we were seeing before, that could be a situation where the view was deleted, or it could be a situation where that action was done as an error, or it could be a situation where, let's see, another situation that I bring about is, let's say that view was moved from one site to another. So in those situations, even deleted views will show up here, and they'll show up historically even if they're gone, but those aren't necessarily the only cases that bring up a no value in those views. In fact, I often for some of my demonstrations will remove that no value or change it to mean something else, but it is still a piece of information that's important.
Awesome. Do you know if there is a way to see who has used WebEdit and for which view or workbook they used it?
There is, in fact, a way to see that. We do not track that in the audit tables. However, we do track that in the HTTP requests tables, and I'm also creating something along those lines to show you which views are being web edited as well. But this brings me to another point, which is we've now given full access to all these tables, which means we really want user feedback on what they want to see in these tables. So if you guys want to see all the tracking of web editing into the audit tables, or we want to track this particular thing in the audit tables, let us know. Make your voice heard on the forums. Get in contact with me. My email is up there, and just let us know how can we improve the experience and how can we improve this entire auditing process.
Great. Let's go with one last one, and after that, I would suggest that people post these questions in our server admin forum because that should be a great section to actually have these questions answered. So last question. See, I would be interested in building something similar to the schedule timer, but for background tasks tracker and how long they took and which were late. Do you have any suggestions on which tables to audit?
Well, for that particular timeline, or sorry, for that particular action, you want the background tasks table. For how long they took, we actually have an admin view just. Sorry, there we go. We actually have an admin view just for that particular case right here, which we call reload, which we call background tasks for extracts and background tasks for non-extracts that were released with 9. This is a version of this has always existed within our admin views, which also tells you which ones are successful and which ones have failed. And here we can see how long they took and when they ran. as well. Now, in terms of how late that information does exist within the tables. Which extracts on which schedule does exist. Off the top of my head, I do not remember that. If you want to ping me on my email afterwards, I can get that information to you. But it's a very similar process to what I did with subscriptions. In fact, I was planning to do that particular workbook in about a month's time whenever I found some free time we have these monthly hackathons at Tableau, and I was planning to do that for a hack. But if someone else wants to do that for me, I'd gladly be able to lend any assistance that I can.
Awesome. So I sent out the link to the